Let's go live now to the Business Council of Australia, Chief Executive Bran Black. We've got a big week next week. Bran, I know you'll be in Canberra for the Economic Roundtable. You've released a report today on better regulation. The government's complained that business don't provide alternatives. Your report today can't be accused of that. It's thick with recommendations. How bleak are things right now in our economy?
Well, look, it's a great question, and we see right across the board that there is great opportunity for Australia to improve its economic credentials, particularly in the context, of course, with respect to productivity. And that's the word that's on everybody's lips heading into next week. Our productivity is at 6-decade lows over the course of the 12 months. Prior, it's gone back by 1%. What that means in real terms is that people have less money in their back pockets at the end of a working week after they've paid for their mortgage or their rent or their groceries and so forth. So for us, we see every opportunity that we can take to improve business investment, which drives productivity, as opportunities that Australia should take. That's what this report is intended to do. Deregulation is one of the big productivity levers that we can pull, and we've put forward 62 suggestions in terms of what we think will make a real difference in practical terms.
Yeah, I know, and some of them quite interesting. Minister for Better Regulation, you're suggesting a regular stock takes of regulation itself. How confident are you that the government might pick up some of these ideas?
Well, we think that the government really should lean into the critical recommendation that we make, and that is that we have a regulatory reduction target. In the same way that other countries have prioritised deregulation, we think that Australia needs to look at doing the same thing. And I do stress, when we talk about deregulation, it's not dispensing with regulation. It's making sure that we're getting to the crux of what we need. So that means conducting a stock take, as you mentioned before, getting a sense of what's out there, what we need, where there are gaps, and how we can best go about filling them. Other jurisdictions like the UK have looked at targets around a 25% reduction within 5 years. That is a reduction in the cost to business associated with regulatory compliance. We think it'd be a great thing if Australia could do likewise.
Yeah, much of the report does focus on the federal government. I guess it makes sense that you've done that in the context of next week's roundtable. But how, you know as well as I do, and I think you've touched on it with one of the case studies about a cafe in Melbourne having to have dozens of licences before they can pour a coffee. How do you get the states and the local governments on board too? How do you corral them into reducing red tape?
That's a really good question. There are levers that the federal government can pull in terms of trying to assist states with undertaking some of those hard-to-reach regulatory reforms. So, for instance, the federal government announced last year the National Productivity Fund. That was something that we'd been calling for a couple of years before that. We think that's an excellent initiative because what it does is incentivise states with financial support in circumstances where they do undertake those really difficult reforms. We see that that's an approach that's similar to the reforms for competition of the 90s and the early 2000s. That was a $5 billion investment then, but it's delivered $60 billion in uplift to our GDP in today's dollars. So the federal government's got a role to play, but to your point, the states really can lean into this space as well. We do a report once a year, which we call Regulation Rumble, where we rank states based on their performance across regulatory settings and planning settings. South Australia came out on top last year, and they came out on top the year before that as well. The reason for that is because they take a really good approach to their planning systems and to their regulatory systems as well. So we think by shining a light on what states and territories do, and also encouraging the federal government to lean in wherever it can, that's a good way of achieving the objective that we all have.
Well, yeah, indeed. And one of the areas the government's talking up for driving productivity is AI. One of the concerns, though, is around what the tech companies call the tech and data mining exception. Are you relaxed with that, given the impact that it would have on Australian copyright holders if they were to just be given carte blanche in terms of mining our data?
I think that's an important issue, and it's an issue that I think as a country and certainly as policy leaders, that's something that we need to look at very closely. Going into this roundtable, the key issues that are on, I think, everybody's lips with respect to AI really go to the type of regulatory oversight with respect to the introduction of the technology more broadly within businesses. That's the first point. And then the second point is the extent to which it is argued there is a need for regulatory intervention in the AI space in terms of workplace relations and the Fair Work Act. And in both of those key areas, our position is very clear. We need to make sure that we're not rushing to legislate in circumstances where we haven't demonstrated that there's a gap in existing legislation. We also need to make sure that Australia can preserve its capacity to retain a competitive edge, to attract investment into the country, to make sure that we can be, and we have every opportunity to be, a world leader in AI development. And so how do we go about doing that? That's a key point.
But do you support our copyright laws as they stand to protect Australian intellectual property, the copyright holders from, I guess, being raided by big tech?
It's an important question because it's an important balance that you need to strike. On the one hand, you want to make sure that you do preserve the rights and the interests of creators so that they can continue to be creative. That's one of those things that helps drive our economy and indeed our society. On the other hand, we see that AI has enormous potential and it's got the capacity to change the way we do business, to make us more productive and to improve our living standards. And of course, we know that AI requires data in order to be able to make it more and more effective in its approach. So the question that we have is how we get the balance right, and that's the policy conversation that we're starting to have right now.
Indeed. It seems like a Trojan horse to me, though, as someone obviously in a media and content creation business, that the big tech says, oh, we need it for our training models. But it seems to me that millions of people are already using AI perfectly well in the context of our current copyright laws. So it's, as I say, it seems a Trojan horse to me from big tech to try and get their claws into Australian-made content.
I think that goes back to the point that I made in terms of gap analyses in relation to existing laws. The important thing in terms of looking at the question of AI, but also more broadly in terms of how we go about regulating, it's always going to be, do we have a series of laws and regulations that do the job that needs to be done? If we identify a gap, then we should look to close that gap. But the challenge that we see in terms of AI generally, but right across the board, deregulation, is that there is always this temptation to rush to regulation when something's not fully understood or when we're concerned that there are fears associated with how it might play out in the long term. And that's just not useful. Policy should be made by reference to evidence, and we need to make sure we've got an evidence base.
Yeah, indeed. I think that's a good point, particularly in terms of our copyright laws. You wouldn't want to be rushing to get rid of those. It's not like, I mean, we're not in step with the US when it comes to gun laws. We don't have to be when it comes to copyright laws, do we?
No, I think that's right. We should be looking to take an Australian approach in terms of dealing with any type of challenge that we have, but we can look to other jurisdictions and see what they're doing with respect to artificial intelligence and with respect to deregulation more broadly. I mentioned before that we look to the steps that the United Kingdom is taking. We see that the Canadians are undertaking similar approaches in terms of their own approach to regulation. We see that that's also the approach that's being taken in jurisdictions like New Zealand. So right across the board, we should be saying what's the appropriate type of regulatory approach here in Australia from a broad regulatory perspective. Our argument is that there is too much and that it's tying businesses up in red tape, and we need to find a way of reducing that burden so that we can encourage our economy to thrive.
Business Council of Australia Chief Bran Black, thanks. Appreciate your time on all of that. We'll see you next week.
It's my pleasure. See you then.